At 2:45 p.m. on December 8, 2022, the dashing convenience store in White Oak was following its typical winter routine. The quiet shift was interrupted when a man in a black hoodie grabbed a bottle of iced tea and approached the counter, refusing to let go of the bottle even as the cashier tried to scan it. Words were exchanged, and the man twisted the cap open without paying. When the cashier began clearing items off the counter and eventually swung a metal pipe to defend the workspace, the man pulled a handgun. He fired multiple times at point-blank range in the middle of the afternoon. After the final shot, the man didn't flee or look for an exit. He calmly reached down, retrieved his iced tea from the counter, and walked out the front door. The shooter strolled through the parking lot past scattering teenagers, pausing to sip his tea as he crossed the asphalt. He moved with the steady, unhurried pace of a man who had just finished a routine chore, leaving a 61-year-old man dying behind him. First responders found the victim, Ayalew Wondimu, with a severed spine. He died before help could make a difference. The store manager immediately recognized the shooter as a man who had threatened to kill him just a week prior, a regular nuisance who had already been formally trespassed from the property. Surveillance cameras from nearby businesses allowed investigators to track the suspect's movements in the minutes following the shooting. He hadn't gone far. He simply walked across the street and entered the Enclave Apartment complex. Within hours, a SWAT team assembled in the hallway of the residential building. They prepared for a high-risk breach, knowing the suspect was armed and had already demonstrated a complete lack of hesitation to use his weapon. The officers believed they were at the finish line of a standard daylight manhunt. They had no way of knowing that by crossing the threshold, they were entering a crime scene that had been festering for weeks. SWAT teams found the suspect, 34-year-old Torrey Moore, fast asleep on a mattress. The apartment was cluttered and freezing, with no working heat. To compensate for the cold, Moore had turned his kitchen oven on high and left the door open. As officers moved through the unit to secure the scene, they encountered a heavy, unmistakable odor. The smell led them away from the kitchen and toward a back bedroom at the end of a short hallway. Inside that room, investigators discovered a human body. It was in an advanced state of decomposition, suggesting it had been there for a significant amount of time. The body belonged to 26-year-old Denise Middleton. She was Moore's girlfriend, and at the time of her death, she was 8.5 months pregnant with his child. The sub-freezing temperatures of the Maryland winter had effectively preserved the scene, masking the smell of the decay for weeks. Moore had continued to sleep and eat in the unit for nearly a month, while a double homicide remained hidden in the back bedroom. During his interrogation, Moore remained remarkably composed. He spoke to detectives about philosophy and his worldview, attempting to frame the shooting at the dashing convenience store as a necessary act of self-defense against hostile employees. He used this same logic to explain Denise's death. Moore claimed she had attacked him with a sword and a stick, insisting that he only fired his weapon because she had told him, "One of us is going to die tonight." However, the last footage of Denise alive tells a different story. Elevator surveillance from October 9th shows the couple returning to the apartment. Denise stands pressed into the furthest corner of the elevator, eyes fixed on the floor, maintaining as much physical distance from Moore as possible. Moore's ability to pivot from philosophical musings to claims of self-defense suggested a deep-seated narcissism. Detectives realized they couldn't rely on his version of events. They had to look at the forensic data left behind in the frozen tomb. Investigators began systematically dismantling Moore's claims by mapping the physical evidence across both crime scenes. Ballistics confirmed the 9mm handgun used at the gas station killed Denise. Furthermore, Moore's touch DNA was found directly on the shell casings recovered from the bedroom. The forensic timeline was devastating. Denise was dead for 26 days before the gas station shooting. Moore's internet history during that month revealed his true priorities. He had searched for how long it takes for a dead body to smell, how to move a body without being seen, and how to plead insanity. This digital trail proved that Moore wasn't a victim of circumstance or a sudden self-defense situation. He was fully aware of the decomposition occurring in his home and was actively calculating how to hide his crimes from the world. In court, Moore's attempts to reframe the murders as self-defense fell apart. 2 separate juries reviewed the ballistics, the DNA on the casings, and the chilling search history. The legal resolution was absolute. Torrey Moore was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms, plus an additional 80 years in prison. The case left behind 3 victims: a hard-working man who came to America for opportunity, a young woman who was weeks away from motherhood, and a child who never had the chance to take a breath. Torrey Moore thought he could talk his way out of a murder charge by hiding behind a story. But the evidence revealed a man who could calmly sip a drink after taking a life, then return home to a nightmare he had built and lived in for weeks.
If you open up a web browser right now and you type the phrase, how to plead insanity into a search engine, you haven't just asked a legal question.
Right, not at all.
From a psychological and, frankly, forensic standpoint, you have actually just proven to the police that you are entirely definitively sane.
Exactly. It's an incredible paradox.
It really is. So today we are diving into a massive stack of sources. I mean, we have police interrogation transcripts, CCTV logs, crime scene photography, and these really dense forensic and autopsy reports.
Yeah, there's a mountain of data here.
There really is. And our mission for this deep dive is to untangle a timeline that starts with a completely random act of afternoon violence and, well, it ends by cracking open the door to a much darker, long-hidden secret.
It's a very layered narrative.
Yeah. We are looking at a story of 2 completely disconnected worlds violently colliding. On one side, you have a brightly lit, chaotic convenience store, and on the other, just a few hundred yards away, a freezing, silent apartment where time had literally stood still for months.
It is a case that really forces us to look at the absolute extremes of human compartmentalization.
Yeah.
We're going to break down the mechanics of the forensic evidence, analyze the psychological framework of a highly manipulative mind, and look at the systemic blind spots that allowed a predator to hide in plain sight.
Right.
But, to understand the end of this timeline, we really have to start in the middle. We have to start on December 8th, 2022.
Okay, set the scene for us.
Well, what does it take for a person to walk away from a murder scene, take a calm sip of iced tea, and go home to sleep beside a ghost?
Jesus. That is the question, isn't it?
It really is the anchor of this whole deep dive.
So let's go to December 8th. The time is exactly 2:45 p.m. We are inside the Dawson convenience store. This is in White Oak, Montgomery County, Maryland.
Just a standard afternoon.
Totally standard. If you were standing by the front door just taking the environment in, it feels completely mundane. The lunch rush has cleared out. You can hear the fluorescent lights buzzing,
Yeah, that classic hum.
Exactly. Employees behind the counter are laughing, they're trading fist bumps, stocking shelves, and into this perfectly normal scene walks a man in a black hoodie, a gray hat, and a tan coat.
And he doesn't stand out at all at this point.
No, he blends right into the background. He buys a gas can, he pays, and he leaves. A few minutes later, he comes back in, grabs a sports drink, pays for it, and walks out again. He is literally just another face in the afternoon blur.
Right. And as we navigate through the evidence of what happens next, we have to keep circling back to that behavioral baseline. Because he's capable of functioning normally. But let's pull the timeline forward just a few minutes.
Yeah, let's do it.
It is now 2:58 p.m. The man in the black hoodie and tan coat walks back through those glass doors for the 3rd time in under 15 minutes.
3rd time's the charm, but in the worst way possible.
Exactly, because this time the entire energy of the room shifts. He doesn't browse, he bypasses the register completely and walks with this intense, rigid purpose straight toward the drinks aisle.
And if you watch the security footage, this is the exact moment the behavioral baseline just fractures.
Completely shatters.
Behind the counter is 61-year-old Ayalew Wondimu. Ayalew is an Ethiopian immigrant. He came to the United States to build a steady, reliable life, He is a fixture at this store. And as this man walks toward the coolers, Aylew's posture instantly changes.
You can see it on the tape. He stiffens up.
Yeah, he locks eyes onto the man and he does not look away. Aylew's body language tells us immediately that he recognizes this guy and he recognizes him as a threat.
The tension is palpable even without audio. The man grabs a bottle of iced tea.
Yeah.
He turns and heads toward the register, but he doesn't pull out a wallet.
No.
He walks up and holds the plastic bottle out toward the scanner. Ayalew reaches out to take it so he can scan the barcode, but the man refuses to let go.
It's just bizarre. He keeps his grip firm.
Right, it's a silent physical standoff. And then, maintaining direct, unbroken eye contact with Ayalew, the man simply twists the cap open.
He breaks the seal without paying. Okay, let's unpack this. Because to a casual observer, that might just look like a rude customer, stealing a $2 drink.
Sure.
But forensically, psychologically, there is a lot more happening in that specific action, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this isn't about petty theft. It is a calculated ethological dominance display.
A dominance display.
Exactly. By handing the bottle forward, but refusing to release it, he is forcing an interaction entirely on his own terms. He is reeling the clerk in.
Yeah.
And by twisting that cap while holding eye contact, he's communicating a very specific message. He's saying, the rules of this store and the social contract of this society, they just do not apply to me.
Wow.
I'm going to do exactly what I want right in front of your face, and you are powerless to stop me.
Yeah.
It is an act designed explicitly to provoke a reaction. He is testing the perimeter of Ayalew's authority.
And Ayalew reacts the way any normal person whose boundaries are being aggressively violated would react. I mean, he is frustrated.
Of course he is.
He starts pulling items off the front counter, clearing the space between them. Now, the CCTV footage is silent, right? But outside the store, a group of teenagers hanging out near the entrance start drifting closer to the glass.
Because they can hear the shouting from inside.
Exactly. The man's body language on the video, though, it remains terrifyingly steady. He just stares.
Unblinking.
Finally, he sets the opened bottle down. He glances over his shoulder at the teenagers outside, just a brief tactical check of his environment. And the absolute millisecond Ayalew reaches forward to grab the bottle and stand it, the man violently erupts.
The physical explosion is instantaneous. He starts grabbing heavy items from the counter displays. We're talking candies, hardware, literally anything he can reach.
Yeah.
And he hurls them directly at Ayalew's face and body. It is a barrage of projectiles.
Ayalew ducks behind the register, and when he reappears on camera, he is holding a steel pipe. He swings it toward the counter to create distance, to defend his space and his livelihood. He's just trying to get this guy out.
And that is when the unthinkable happens. The man reaches into his layered clothing. He draws a 9mm handgun, right there in the middle of a Thursday afternoon.
In broad daylight.
He points it at Ayalew, and he fires. He fires multiple rounds.
Oh.
One of those 9mm bullets strikes Ayalew and completely severs his spine. He collapses behind the register. In the span of a few seconds, a dispute over an opened bottle of iced tea has escalated into a fatal execution.
The speed of the escalation is just staggering. But what happens next? I mean, this provides a chilling window into the shooter's neurology.
It really does. Because when a normal human being discharges a firearm in a confined public space, the sympathetic nervous system takes over.
Right, the adrenaline.
Exactly. Adrenaline floods the bloodstream, heart rate spikes. There is an immediate fight or flight response. You usually see panic or a full sprint to the nearest exit.
Yeah.
But this suspect experiences none of that physiological override.
None of it? He doesn't sprint. He doesn't even jog. He calmly lowers the 9mm. He reaches his hand out, picks up his open bottle of iced tea from the counter, turns his back on the man he just shot, and walks out the front doors. He is actively taking a sip from the bottle as he casually strolls out into the parking lot. I mean, the complete absence of adrenaline is terrifying.
It indicates a profound detachment. This is the behavior of someone who either feels entirely legally and morally justified in his actions, or someone whose internal emotional scale is so blunted that taking a human life registers as no more significant than completing a mundane errand, like picking up dry cleaning.
That is horrifying. But while he is completely detached, the world outside is slamming into reality. The sound of a 9mm going off in a small store, it echoes across the gas station. Those teenagers scatter instantly.
Understandably.
And this is where a fascinating piece of the puzzle falls into place. A woman in a blue SUV is pulling into the parking lot right as the shots ring out. She throws her car in reverse, backing out to safety, but she dials 911 immediately.
Thank goodness she did.
And her call is incredible. She gives the dispatcher a hyper-specific description. I mean, she says, khaki pants, a blue shirt, a blue do-rag, a gray hat on top of that, a blue hoodie, and a tan coat.
We really have to pause and appreciate how rare that 911 call is in the context of forensic psychology.
Oh, definitely.
Typically, when a witness experiences the sudden trauma of gunfire, They fall victim to what we call the weapon focus effect.
Where they only see the gun.
Right. The human brain zeroes in on the source of the threat, the gun, and it completely fails to encode the peripheral details like facial features or layered clothing.
But this witness somehow bypassed that psychological trap.
She did. She maintained complete situational awareness and gave police an exact visual template of the shooter.
Which was crucial. First responders are on the scene by 3:06 p.m., barely 8 minutes after the trigger was pulled. Medics rush into the Dashin store and find Ayalew behind the counter. But the trauma of a severed spine and multiple organ punctures is just too catastrophic. Ayalew Wondimu, who survived the journey to America to build a better life, dies right there on the linoleum floor.
It's an absolute tragedy. Police immediately lock down the store, and crime scene technicians find the first major piece of physical evidence.
The shell casings.
Yes. Spent 9mm shell casings scattered around the cash register.
But as the investigators are securing the scene, the store manager arrives, and the narrative abruptly shifts. This wasn't a random tragic encounter with a stranger. The manager looks at the CCTV footage and tells the police, "I know exactly who this is."
He recognizes him immediately.
He tells them this man is a known, sustained threat to the store. In fact, exactly 1 week earlier, on December 1st, the same man was inside harassing customers for money. When the manager told him to leave, the man got right in his face, started hurling items across the counter, the exact same behavioral loop we just saw, and explicitly threatened his life.
And he was very specific with his threats.
Very specific. He told the manager, "I'm going to shoot you. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to get you outside." And even pointed out that he recognized the manager's car in the lot. The manager had defended himself with that same steel pipe. He had formally trespassed the man multiple times.
It's essentially the psychological equivalent of a stress test on the building's security.
The stress test. I like that phrasing.
Yeah, the suspect had been probing the boundaries, testing the responses of the staff and the police. And because he was transient and often provided false names, the bureaucratic system of trespass warnings failed to map onto his physical reality.
I struggle to understand this from a legal and systemic perspective. I really have to push back here.
Okay, go ahead.
If you have a man who is issued a verbal death threat, who has physically assaulted staff by throwing heavy merchandise, and who has multiple formal trespass notices on file,
How does our legal framework allow him to simply wander back into that store 3 times in one afternoon? Are the police just powerless to act preventatively?
it is a massive systemic blind spot when dealing with transient offenders. You see, trespass laws are largely reactive.
Right.
A piece of paper in a filing cabinet does not create a physical barrier at the door. If a business calls to report a trespasser, but the individual simply walks away before a patrol car arrives, which he routinely did, the police have very limited options.
Because they can't find him.
Exactly. Without a verified name or a permanent address, they cannot execute an arrest warrant after the fact. He understood the police response times perfectly. He exploited the gap between the law as it is written and the law as it can be physically enforced.
Which means the immediate priority for the detectives is catching him right now before he vanishes into that gap again. They know he is armed, and they know he is lethal.
They start pulling CCTV feeds not just from the store but from all the surrounding buildings, and the manager gives them a vital behavioral clue. He walks everywhere. He never drives.
And that detail changes the entire geographic profile of the manhunt.
Because he can't be far.
Right.
Yeah.
If he is on foot, his radius of escape in the minutes following the shooting is incredibly small. Investigators begin triangulating the camera feeds outward from the gas station. And at 3:03 p.m., just 5 minutes after the murder, a camera mounted on the Enclave Apartment complex, which is this massive residential building directly across the street, picks him up.
And the footage shows him crossing the street. He isn't darting through traffic. He isn't hiding in the shadows. He walks into the complex, enters the stairwell, and begins climbing.
Slowly and steadily.
And in his hand, as he walks up to his apartment, he is still casually holding that same opened bottle of iced tea.
It's just bizarre. But the police now have a pinpointed location.
Oh.
But they also have a tactical nightmare.
Yeah, I bet.
They have an active shooter, armed with a 9mm, who has just demonstrated a willingness to execute someone over a minor dispute. And he's cornered inside a densely populated high-rise building.
Right. There are families in there.
Exactly. Standard operational procedure goes out the window. They apply for and immediately receive a no-knock search warrant.
A SWAT team silently stages outside his apartment door. This is a dynamic entry scenario. They are wearing heavy armor, carrying rifles, anticipating a massive firefight. They expect a barricaded suspect who is waiting for them. The ram hits the door. They breach. They flood the apartment with weapons drawn.
And the reality inside the apartment is entirely dissonant from their tactical expectations.
Complete opposite.
The suspect, 34-year-old Torrey Damien Moore, is not crouching behind furniture with a gun. He is lying on a mattress in the middle of the living room, fast asleep.
Fast asleep. 5 minutes after a murder.
They swarm him and take him into custody before his brain can even orient to the breach.
And as the officers are zipping the cuffs onto his wrists, pulling him off the mattress, his reaction is completely surreal. I mean, he doesn't ask why they are there. He doesn't ask for a lawyer.
No.
He starts whining. He complains to the heavily armed tactical team that the apartment is cold, and he doesn't want to sit on the cold floor. His entire focal point is his own mild, immediate physical discomfort.
Which forces the officers to suddenly take stock of the environment they've just stormed into. As the adrenaline of the dynamic entry begins to fade, their sensory awareness returns.
Yeah.
And the physical state of the apartment is alarming. It is mid-December in Maryland, and the ambient temperature inside the unit is freezing. There is no central heating running at all.
The officers are conducting their secondary sweep, clearing corners to ensure no one else is hiding. They open closets. They are empty. The kitchen is a disaster. But they notice something incredibly strange in the kitchen. The oven is turned on, and the dial is cranked to high. But the door is closed, and there is absolutely no food inside.
He was using the oven as a makeshift space heater. But an oven isn't designed to circulate air. It simply radiates dry, localized heat.
Right.
The thermodynamics of that setup in a freezing, uninsulated apartment create a bizarre microclimate. You get these pockets of intense, dry heat clashing with freezing ambient air.
Wow.
But the temperature anomaly isn't what sets off the officers' internal alarms.
No. As they move deeper down the short hallway, they hit a wall, an invisible, heavy wall of odor. It is a smell that is chemically unique. It triggers an ancient, primal alarm bell in the human brain.
Unmistakable.
It is the inescapable scent of advanced human decomposition.
The officers follow that scent to a closed door at the end of the hall. They push it open, shining their tactical lights into the back bedroom.
And on the floor of that freezing room, they find a human body.
The physical state of the remains is horrific. Because of the fluctuating temperatures, the freezing nights, combined with the dry, localized heat from the kitchen oven, the decomposition process has been highly erratic. But to the seasoned officers, the visual cues make one thing immediately clear. This person did not die today. They've been lying in this room for weeks, possibly over a month.
You can hear the raw shock on the police body cam audio. One officer recoils and whispers, "Jesus Christ. Mike, you think a female? Wonder if that was Mom."
What's fascinating here is the sheer psychological chasm between the police officers and the man sitting in the living room. Torrey Moore is handcuffed 10 feet away. And while the police are staring at a decomposing corpse, trying to process the horror, Torrey is acting like he's at a hotel front desk disputing a room charge.
That is so dark. He asks the officers if someone can grab his clothes because he's chilly. He asks for his glasses. And then he asks a question that completely stuns the room. He asks if he can have his cell phone so he can text his mother.
Right. While they're looking at a body they suspect might be his mother.
I look at this apartment, and the only analogy that makes sense to me is that it was a sensory deprivation chamber of his own design. It was a fortress of denial. Once that front door locked, the rules of reality were suspended. But how does the human brain physically accomplish that? How do you compartmentalize a rotting human body just a few feet away, sleep on a mattress, walk across the street to buy iced tea, and ask to text your mom?
It requires a pathological level of narcissism. In Torrey Moore's constructed reality, the body in the back room had ceased to be a human being with significance.
It was just nothing.
It had been downgraded to an inanimate object, basically a piece of broken furniture that he simply chose not to look at. His request to text his mother while a body lies nearby isn't just denial. It is proof that his internal landscape is populated exclusively by his own needs.
The crime scene unit takes over the apartment. The most urgent question is identifying the victim in the back room. The leasing office confirms that Torrey Moore is the only name on the lease. But the next morning, detectives return with a comprehensive search warrant, and the identity they uncover is heartbreaking.
It really is. The victim is definitively identified as 26-year-old Denise Middleton. She was Torrey Moore's girlfriend.
Yeah.
And the autopsy confirms a detail that elevates the tragedy exponentially. At the time of her death, Denise was 8.5 months pregnant with his child.
God. The forensic reality of the crime scene tells a very clear, very brutal story. Denise didn't die of natural causes or pregnancy complications.
No.
She was murdered. The medical examiner determines she was shot 7 times. And the detail that obliterates any possible narrative of an accidental discharge or a face-to-face struggle is the trajectory of the bullets.
Right.
At least 4 of those rounds entered through her back.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the physical evidence found in that bedroom links the two seemingly disparate events of December 8th together.
How so?
While processing the debris around Denise's body, technicians find spent 9mm shell casings.
And let's dive into the science of those casings for a second, because it is crucial. They don't just match the caliber, right? The ballistics match the specific striations from the gun fired at the dash-in store. But more importantly, the lab extracts something called touch DNA from the shell casings.
Yes.
Now, when we say touch DNA, we aren't talking about a pool of blood or saliva. Can you explain the actual mechanics of how investigators pull a genetic profile off a piece of metal that was ejected from an explosion?
It is an incredibly delicate forensic process. You see, when a person loads a magazine, they are using their thumb to press the brass casing down against the spring.
Right.
The sheer friction of that pressure causes microscopic skin cells, epithelial cells, to slough off the ridges of the fingerprint and adhere to the metal casing.
Even after it's fired?
Exactly. Even after the bullet is fired and the casing is ejected, those microscopic cells often remain trapped in the grooves of the metal.
Wow.
Forensic technicians carefully swab the casing, extract those few cells, and use a process called polymerase chain reaction, or PCR, to amplify the DNA into a readable profile.
And the DNA profile amplified from the casings that killed Denise Middleton is a perfect match to Torrey Moore.
It's undeniable.
The science is absolute. He loaded the gun. He fired the gun. But to understand how Denise ended up in that freezing room, investigators have to pull the timeline backward.
They do.
They have to map the architecture of a relationship built entirely on isolation.
Denise's background was marked by severe vulnerability. She had struggled with homelessness and was navigating the shelter system. Just before moving into the Enclave apartment, she was living in a women's shelter in Virginia, trying to stabilize her life in preparation for the birth of her child.
But Torrey Moore recognized that vulnerability, and he weaponized it. He positioned himself as her savior.
That's the classic move.
He began filling her head with paranoid narratives about the people trying to help her. He told her the Virginia shelter was corrupt. He claimed they were stealing her money, forcing her to take unnecessary medication, and plotting to illegally evict her.
From a psychological standpoint, this is the fundamental mechanism of coercive control. I think of it as establishing a financial monopoly, but instead of money, the abuser is monopolizing the victim's social capital. By convincing her that the shelter staff, the social workers, and the state were all conspiring against her, he effectively bankrupted her trust in the outside world.
So she had no one else.
He made himself the sole provider of her reality.
He used geographic isolation as the final lock on the cage. He ordered an Uber or bought her a bus ticket to cross state lines, bringing her from a communal shelter in Virginia to a locked apartment in Maryland where he was the sole leaseholder. Once she crossed that threshold, the power imbalance was absolute.
The relationship was highly volatile. They broke up and reconciled frequently. But the final chapter begins in early October. Torrey decided to take Denise on a trip to New York, staying at a Marriott in Queens.
Right.
He told detectives this was supposed to be a trip to visit her mother in Brooklyn, but according to his own warped recounting, the trip was a disaster.
He painted himself to police as the long-suffering, patient boyfriend.
Of course he did.
He complained that she was ignoring him, telling him, "Don't talk to me on the street." He claimed she was talking to other men outside a 7-Eleven. They returned to Maryland around October 8th. And that brings us to the CCTV logs from the Enclave apartment complex. The footage from October 9th, 2022, around 7 p.m., is the last confirmed sighting of Denise Middleton alive.
The visual data in that elevator footage is a masterclass in reading proxemics.
Proxemics?
Yes, the study of how humans use physical space to communicate stress or dominance. The doors open. Torrey and Denise walk in. Torrey immediately takes a wide planted stance near the front, effectively blocking the doors and claiming the territory of the elevator car.
And then you look at Denise. She is tucked into the furthest back corner of the car. Her body language is screaming.
It really is.
She is completely withdrawn. Her eyes are blank, staring at the wall, actively avoiding his gaze. When the doors open at their floor, Torrey steps out. Denise lingers inside the car for a long, heavy second. Her shoulder slumps, and then, slowly, she follows him down the hall.
You are watching a woman who knows she has no other options.
Yeah.
She is 8.5 months pregnant, financially dependent, geographically isolated, and returning to an environment controlled entirely by a man she is deeply afraid of.
And I have to ask the difficult question here. At what point does saving someone from a homeless shelter legally and psychologically cross the line into holding them captive? There are no bars on the windows, but she is as trapped as if there were.
Psychological captivity is often far more secure than physical captivity.
Wow, that's true.
The walls of her prison were built out of dependency and fear. Once they were inside that apartment, a massive physical altercation occurred. Torrey later admitted to detectives that they fought over something as trivial as her using the bathroom.
Are you kidding me?
No, he admitted that he pushed her, and that she fell hard to the floor, a woman who was weeks away from her due date.
Which brings us to the interrogation room. It is December 11th. Torrey Moore has been sitting in jail for the convenience store murder, and now 2 detectives walk into a sterile interview room to talk to him about the rotting body they found in his bedroom.
If you read the transcripts, the detective's strategy is brilliant. They know they are dealing with a malignant narcissist.
Right.
If they walk in, slamming files on the table, accusing him of being a monster, his ego will immediately deploy its defenses, and he will demand a lawyer. So they do the exact opposite.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
They sit down, they look at this man who just executed a clerk and his pregnant girlfriend, and the very first thing out of the lead detective's mouth is a compliment. He looks at Torrey and says, "You're in good physical condition."
It is a calculated opening move. They are establishing a baseline of respect that appeals directly to his vanity. They note that he is completely sober, lucid, and articulate. They are inviting him to take the stage.
And Torrey takes the microphone. His grandiosity is absolutely breathtaking. He is facing the rest of his life in a concrete cell, and he treats the interrogation like a podcast interview.
He loves the attention.
He literally leans back in his chair and tells the detectives, this one right here might be one for the books. He thinks he is a historical figure.
Seems credible.
He starts going on these massive, bizarre tangents about how Tupac Shakur is actually from Baltimore and how Tupac had secret connections to John F. Kennedy. He is lecturing the detectives on history.
And the detectives let him spin. They don't correct his historical inaccuracies. They are utilizing a highly evolved application of the Reed technique.
Can you explain that?
Sure. The Reed technique relies on 3 core components: factual analysis, behavioral observation, and a 9-step psychological interrogation process. A key part of that process is minimization and theme development.
Let's break down the mechanics of that empathy trap, because it's wild. When Torrey brings up the Dashin convenience store shooting, he immediately plays the victim. He claims the Ethiopian clerks had a long-standing vendetta against him, that Ayalew attacked him with a steel pipe, and that he fired his 9mm in pure self-defense.
Right.
Now, the detectives have the 4K video. They know exactly who escalated the fight, but instead of challenging him, they validate him.
They nod along. They tell him, you're not an animal. You just wanted an iced tea, and they came at you with a pipe. By validating his delusion on the first murder, they build an immense reservoir of trust. They align their reality with his. And once he feels completely secure in that alliance, they seamlessly pivot the exact same strategy toward the murder of Denise Middleton.
They use his own biology against him. Earlier that day, while waiting in the holding cell, Torrey threw up.
Yes.
The detectives lean in and say, "We know why your stomach is sick. You threw up because you shot her. And the guilt is eating you alive because you're fundamentally a good spiritual dude."
This is the alternative question phase of the Reed technique.
Okay.
You offer the suspect 2 choices for why they committed the crime. One is morally reprehensible. You shot her in cold blood because you're a monster.
Right.
The other provides a face-saving excuse. She attacked you, and you had to defend yourself. Human psychology dictates that the ego will always lunge for the excuse, bypassing the self-preservation instinct to remain silent.
That is brilliant. They say to him, "She was bigger than you. She was heavy. If she throws a punch, that's dangerous. She came at you, didn't she? You had no choice." They hand him a legal lifeline wrapped in a confession.
And Torrey takes the bait, but he is incredibly cunning. He admits to the physical fight, He places the timeline on October 8th or 9th, but then he introduces an entirely fabricated narrative to fit the self-defense theme. He claims Denise suddenly armed herself with a sword or a big stick.
A sword? Seriously?
Yes, he quotes her as delivering a cinematic threat. One of us is going to die tonight.
He admits they were wrestling on the bed. He admits they tried to relieve her of the weapon. But no matter how many times the detectives press him, they say, "How many times did you pull the trigger, Torrey?" He absolutely refuses to say the words, "I shot her."
He dances right up to the line of a full confession, implies he won a life-or-death struggle, but never crosses the threshold.
No.
This raises an important question. Did Torrey Moore actually believe his own self-defense narrative? Had his narcissism so thoroughly rewritten his internal history that he genuinely viewed shooting a pregnant woman 4 times in the back as an act of justified self-preservation?
Or
Or was he fully lucid, playing a calculated game of legal chess, testing the boundaries of the detective's gullibility?
I think the physical evidence obliterates any possibility of genuine delusion. I mean, you cannot claim you were defending yourself from a frontal sword attack when the victim is shot in the back as she is turning away.
Right.
He knew exactly what he did. But his ego required him to try and outsmart the interrogation.
The timeline of his actions, immediately following the murder, provides the ultimate proof of his calculating, predatory nature.
Let's reconstruct that digital and physical timeline. We know from the elevator footage they arrived at the apartment at 7 p.m. Based on the lack of unpacked bags and the state of the scene, investigators believe Denise was executed within minutes of walking through that door. And exactly 1 hour later, at 8 p.m., the lobby cameras capture Torrey Moore walking back out of the building, alone.
He leaves her body on the floor of the back bedroom, locks the door, and begins a massive geographic evasion. He leaves Maryland entirely.
Wow.
For the next 26 days, he travels across the country, distancing himself from the crime scene.
But then he makes a decision that defies all logic. He comes back.
Yeah.
He travels all the way back to Montgomery County, Maryland, walks into the Enclave apartment complex, puts his key in the door, and moves back in.
It's hard to fathom.
He actively chooses to live in a freezing apartment, sleeping on a mattress in the living room, while the decomposing body of his girlfriend and unborn child lies just down the hall.
And if a defense attorney wanted to argue that this return to the scene was evidence of a psychotic break or a fugue state, well, the digital forensics team completely dismantled that argument.
They sure did.
When they extracted the data from Torrey's cell phone, they analyzed his search history during those weeks.
He didn't search for a hospital. He didn't search for an ambulance or a mental health crisis hotline.
No.
He typed highly specific, premeditated queries into his phone. He searched how long it takes for a dead body to smell. He searched how to move a body without being seen. And the search that essentially sealed his fate in court, he searched how to plead insanity.
As we discussed at the very beginning, the insanity defense is not a medical diagnosis.
Yeah.
It is a very strict legal framework. In most jurisdictions, it relies on some variation of the Omnaten rule or the substantial capacity test. To be found legally insane, you must prove that at the time of the crime, due to a severe mental disease or defect, you literally did not understand the nature of your actions, or you did not know that your actions were wrong.
And I have to push back on the Hollywood perception of the insanity plea here. People think if a crime is bizarre enough, the defendant must be insane.
They do.
But if you are sitting on your phone, actively researching the legal thresholds required to successfully fake a mental defect in order to avoid a prison sentence, you are demonstrating a profound, lucid awareness of exactly what you did.
Absolutely.
You understand the wrongfulness of the act so clearly that you are actively planning a complex legal deception to escape the consequences.
Exactly. It establishes mens rea, the guilty mind. It proves premeditation of a cover-up and consciousness of guilt. He thought he could hack the judicial system the same way he manipulated the shelter system and the trespass laws.
But the judicial system finally closed the loop. On May 16, 2024, Torrey Moore stood trial for the murder of Ayalew Wondimu at the Dashin store. The jury didn't need to guess. They watched the 4K video. They saw the iced tea. They saw the complete absence of human empathy. They found him guilty of first-degree murder.
And 6 months later, on November 22, 2024, a second jury convened to hear the devastating facts of what happened inside the Enclave apartment.
Yeah.
The prosecution presented the touch DNA. They presented the bullet trajectories proving Denise was shot in the back, and they projected his cell phone search history onto a screen for the jury to read.
The self-defense illusion shattered completely.
It did. They convicted him on 2 counts of first-degree murder for Denise Middleton and her unborn child.
The judge looked at the totality of the terror Torrey Moore had inflicted and handed down a sentence that guaranteed he would never exploit another systemic blind spot. 3 consecutive life terms, plus an additional 80 years.
He tried to act as the author and director of his own twisted narrative, but the final chapter was written by the microscopic skin cells and digital breadcrumbs he left behind.
As we close out this deep dive, we have spent an hour dissecting the forensic mechanics and the psychology of a narcissist. But it is vital that we don't let the bizarre details, the iced tea, the Tupac tangents, the search history, overshadow the actual human cost of this timeline.
We really can't.
This isn't just a story about a killer's grandiosity. It is about 3 futures that were permanently erased. We have to remember Ayalew Wondimu, a man who worked tirelessly to build an honorable, steady life for his family, only to have it taken because he asked someone to pay for a beverage. We have to remember Denise Middleton, a young woman navigating the extreme hardships of the shelter system, seeking a safe harbor for her baby, only to be lured into a trap. And we have to remember a child who was weeks away from taking their first breath.
The loudest, most public violence happened in broad daylight under fluorescent lights. But the deepest, most sustained cruelty happened behind a locked door in freezing silence.
So, what does this all mean? When we look at the totality of the evidence, it leaves you with a really unsettling thought about the modern era of crime and our digital footprints. Torrey Moore thought he was outsmarting the system by locking his door and researching legal loopholes in the dark. But it makes you wonder, in an age where our phones track every panicked Google search, every location ping, and every microscopic cell we leave on a piece of brass, has the concept of a perfect crime simply become a technological impossibility?